Hey, what's going on? It's Dr. Mike T. Nelson here. Thank you very much for taking time to watch and listen to this webinar all about the Flex Diet, a metabolic flexibility certification course presented by me, Dr. Mike T. Nelson. So, reason that you're here may be because of kind of three areas. One, you're an athlete or just a fitness enthusiast training in the gym, and you're trying to figure out which diet is the best for both body composition and performance. There's a bunch of stuff you can do that can help body composition, although it may not be that healthy and will probably not help your performance. Of course, you can just eat all the calories, and that may help performance if your goal is, say, maximal strength. But most people have some type of body composition goal in mind with that also, just to look better naked, or possibly competing in a sport that rewards relative strength, and a lot of sports have weight classes. But a lot of people don't have a system to handle nutrition. They just keep trying random stuff from if it fits your macros to meal plans, and they don't really have any thought given to what is the long-term progression other than the latest 30-day challenge or kind of the latest trend that's going on. And of course, everything on the old interwebs is telling you that XYZ is the newest and latest and greatest thing. You may be here because you're a gym owner and your members need some nutrition help. So as I've been traveling around, as of recording this right now, I'm actually traveling on the road again. And I get to talk to a lot of athletes, a lot of gym owners, a lot of trainers. And one of the biggest problems I hear from gym owners especially is they know that they need to provide some type of education for trainers, but they don't really know what to do, and they generally just do a next 30-day challenge, which this can work for the short term, but is not a very good long-term solution. And as you can tell, it creates confusion because maybe you did a 30-day keto reset, and now you're doing some other program that has maybe higher amounts of carbohydrates in it. So your clients get very confused, and there isn't really much of a long-term progression in mind. And they're also looking to get their coaches and trainers qualified to offer nutritional programming that is a scalable way. So if you're running a gym and you've got hundreds of clients and several trainers, it is a lot of work to do nutrition education. So having a system that's done for you, that has good information based on research and real-world results, makes your life much easier. And of course, the clients and everybody else are going to get much better results, which is going to make your gym look a lot better. You might be here if you're a trainer. You know your clients need nutrition, but finding and creating a nutrition service is turning out to be more complicated and confusing than you've hoped for. This is one of the biggest complaints I hear from trainers is there's a lot of good information out there, but when the rubber kind of meets the road of how do you provide nutrition education for clients, it gets confusing. And especially, how do you make that a little bit individualized for each person? So can you have a system that gives you the overall concepts and then a way to make it more personalized for each person? And of course, there's a lot of great nutrition certifications out there. And again, it's finding out which one is the best for you and suits your needs specifically. So again, welcome if you're an athlete, a gym owner, or a trainer. I think you'll find this webinar will be very useful for your time. So that's the reason I created the Flex Diet. It was created for fitness enthusiasts to finally understand the non-biased and scientific nutrition for both body composition and performance. Right? So give you a system that you can get better at both of those. Also for gym owners, to get one or all your coaches certified, in a scalable nutrition program your members will actually follow and see real results from. Right? So we know in nutrition that compliance is a big issue. And you can't really just give everyone the exact same cookie cutter approach and expect them, one, to get the best results they can, and two, to actually be compliant with that, right? So trainers get certified in the most comprehensive nutrition certification, specializing in flexible dieting, right? So as you figured out, the Flex Diet is a combination of the concepts of metabolic flexibility and also flexible dieting, right? So this allows you to use a system with your clients, but the system is also flexible, right? Going back to that adherence component, right? We need clients, one, to learn the best that they can for their body, and everyone's going to be a little bit different from the next person, right? So how can that client be flexible in their approach to increase their adherence on a day-by-day process, right? Because I think the days of just saying, okay, you can only eat X, Y, and Z, here's your kind of naughty and nice list of foods, I think that works for a very short period of time, but long term I find that that tends to fall apart. Using a flexible approach is going to be much better, and it's going to allow clients to integrate that into the real world. So again, this was designed for flexibility, to work with human behavior for maximum results, and of course, buy-in, right? Because you want clients and everyone to look at it and go, oh, okay, that's something I can actually apply to my real life. Because they're going to have social events, they're going to have other things that come up. So you need a system that is going to be able to handle those things and be an education for them in the process. Briefly about my background, I did a PhD in exercise physiology and metabolism from the University of Minnesota. There I actually studied metabolic flexibility, going back about 12-ish years ago now when I started that whole crazy process, and also looked at heart rate variability too. Previous to that, I did a master's in mechanical engineering. My coursework was initially looking at biomechanics. I ended up looking more at heat transfer and created a ray gun to zap a bunch of monkeys, which is a different story. But it was a computer-generated model to look at tissue heating effects. So I do kind of view the body a little bit more from the mechanical engineering side in terms of different feedback loops and how everything works together. I did a CSCS, Certified Strength and Conditioning Specialist, through the NSCA, and also Certified Sports Nutritionist through the ISSN. Right now I also work as an online trainer with a few select clients, which I've been doing for over a decade now. I did some in-person training in gyms before that. I'm an adjunct professor, a faculty member at the Carrick Institute. Again, they primarily do neurology. So I'm helping them with their human performance program, which I got to co-create with Dr. Kenneth J., Dr. Joe Clark, Dr. Freddie Garcia. And of course, I created the Flex Diet Cert, which is why you're here. In my free time, I enjoy kiteboarding. So imagine trying to ride a board with a big sort of inflatable parachute-looking thing, and you get to glide across the water. And if you do it right, you can actually jump, well, pretty high in the air. I'm still working on that part, at least the successfully landing part. And you can usually find me at local metal concerts also. I publish research in both engineering and physiology journals, peer reviewer for different journals, author 2 academic textbook chapters, and I started training clients in 2006. So I have experience in both the real world and the academic world. So I really like looking at what is the intersection of both of those, right? So what is kind of the gap between them? Can we do things that are based on research, but also work and apply in the real world? So I first created the metabolic flexibility product actually over 10 years ago now. So as I said, I started studying it in the lab, And I've been testing it on the clients ever since then. A few clients now I've got that have used it for over a decade now. So I know the concept of metabolic flexibility is a rather new concept, but I've been practicing it on many people for over a decade. As a side story, I had one guy even use it on his dog, which is kind of crazy. And just the other day, I found some research looking at metabolic flexibility in dogs, and his dog actually lost weight too. But he has used it himself. I talked to him just the other day to move up and down in different weight classes in competitive sport competition. He's gone his body weight as high as 245 down to as lean as 200 over several years, which he's done on purpose, and then gone back up a little bit, all the while increasing his performance the entire time. So even when he was cutting down in weight on purpose to be a lighter competitor, his performance still kept going up. I talked to another guy literally last week who's over in Australia. He had took one of the early certifications, was actually more a product at that point, wasn't a certification. And he was remarking when I put up on Facebook some new research on metabolic flexibility, that almost over a decade later, he's still using the same concepts, and his body composition is better now than it has ever been, and his performance is good, and he's also a very busy person. He's got a couple of kids now, so he has been able to integrate it into real life. So it's not something where you just have to be an elite athlete who doesn't really have anything else to do. It's designed for people who actually have jobs and family and other responsibilities that they have to take care of. See, the reason I created the certification is that I wanted to be able to reach more people. All right, so having a product is useful, but I'm always looking for where is a higher point of leverage. And I also just really enjoy the teaching process. So if I can teach athletes and gym owners and trainers how to use this, then in turn they can help reach other people, right? So that's a good leverage point for me. I also realize that most gyms don't really have a system for doing nutrition or recovery work, which was kind of unintentional and doing their members a disservice. And when I talked to them about it, it was generally that they have tried different things and they never really had a system in place. And it got to be just way too much of a pain in the butt for them to continue. But they kind of felt bad because they knew that they should be doing some type of that work, but kind of got lost on what exactly to do. So I gave myself about 6 months of taking these concepts I learned from both research and years of practice before I even put out the first module of the system. So I started testing those individual concepts, and I wanted to not release anything until I actually had it down as more of a system that could be used in a logical progression, but allowed for the client to vary a little bit from day to day. So from an engineering standpoint, that was kind of a interesting problem of how you can have kind of overarching guidelines within a system and some movement and a relatively known path, but allow this small scale variability to take place. Because at the end of the day, I knew that if we made something incredibly rigid from what the client was doing or the athlete, that their compliance would not be very good, and therefore the results would not be very good, and they would not be able to implement it into their life in the long term. Something would happen, they would get off course, and then they would never get back on again. So that's why I combine the concepts of flexible dieting, not only because there's pretty good data now showing that it is a better approach than just the standard, oh, just eat this, not that. All right, so kind of the naughty and nice list of food. I think that can be a good start for some people, and it does give them some guidance. But in my opinion, that's not the best idea to do long term. And of course, I've been on a whole bunch of other podcasts and yammering on about metabolic flexibility for over a decade now. And what I came up with was 8 different interventions that you can do as an athlete or have your trainers do as a gym owner or as a trainer yourself. And the ones that I came up with are protein, some type of intermittent fasting, micronutrition, NEAT, exercise, dietary fat, possibly ketogenic approach, carbs, if you want to put a Z on it, and sleep. And you're probably wondering, well, why are these listed in this particular order, right? So I limited it to only 8 interventions. Now the reality is you could probably come up with more than that, but I did this for the sake of time, right? Because nobody wants to take a course that's like 4 years. You might as well go get a degree trying to figure out what to do with clients. The other part is I had to figure out, well, how do I particularly rate these, right? Because I wanted it to be a what's called progressive disclosure. So then when you start working, right, we're going to start with intervention number 1, and then through the cert, you're eventually going to get all the way to intervention number 8. But I know that because of time and other things, people are going to drop off. And I wanted them to start with what is the biggest leverage point. And in the past, I would only do that based on physiology. So I would look at all the research and say, hey, eating more dietary protein for body comp and performance has a lot of great benefits. But I could say the exact same thing about sleep, especially with some of the new research now. Sleep is becoming a very sexy topic, and for good reason based on physiology. But then I realized, okay, well, how practical are both of these? So if we compare one extreme end of the spectrum to the other, so we compare protein to sleep. What I find is that when you discuss sleep with clients, is there great physiologic reasons for sleep? Absolutely. We can quote all sorts of great research. Matthew Walker's book, Why We Sleep, is amazing. But the downside was that trying to get clients to sleep more, I had better luck trying to bang my head against the wall. It was very, very difficult. And what I realized was something I called coaching leverage is the physiologic factor times the psychological ability to change. And what I did was I rated them on both. So protein, that's pretty high. That's probably a 9 on physiology. But I could say the same thing for sleep. I mean, I could even say maybe sleep's even a little bit greater. So maybe that gets a 10. But on the psychology, the psychologic ability to change, if you have people trying to get better body composition, telling them they need to eat more of a specific thing, they're like, really? You want me to eat more of something? You realize I'm trying to lose fat, and you're telling me I need to eat more. This doesn't make sense, but I like your idea. And yep, that's what we're telling them. Eat more protein. And I find that their ability to do that was pretty high. So on a 1 to 10 scale, protein gets about an 81. So a 9 and a 9. However, sleep, trying to get someone to sleep more or even increasing their quality of sleep, which is a little bit easier to do, I find was much harder. So sleep from a psychological ability to change is like a 1. So the coaching leverage for that is a 10. Coaching leverage for protein is an 81. So even though if we only look at physiology, we could argue that sleep probably has more of a bigger physiologic impact. But when we look at the coaching leverage of what intervention do we want you to start with, protein, much higher number than sleep. Therefore, protein is where we're going to have most people start. And we'll get into how you vary within that. And what I did then is I just rated the rest of them. And I came up with the 1 through 8 scale. And as you figured out, when you start the course, these are the module numbers that is going to be in order. Protein, fasting, micronutrition, and therefore. And we'll get into the specifics of that. So how each intervention is laid out. We have a continuing evolution of the big concepts. So learning the individual concepts of metabolic flexibility and how it applies. So the one video for each one of the interventions is just all on the big overarching concept, right? Because if you understand this really, really well, you're going to be able to answer any questions that people come up with, right? Because you understand the concept. And the thing I keep harping on, which I also got from my buddy Dr. Ben House, is context. You understand the context of what that athlete or that person or that client or that trainer, or if you're a gym owner, what your gym is serving. You understand context. And that makes you very, very useful and gives you a better answer. However, it is not talked a lot about because people like simple stories, right? So this will evolve over the course of 8 modules. So we'll start simple and we'll cover a whole bunch of concepts. So this is kind of like a continuing story each part. Then we have a theory video. So in this 1-hour video, you'll learn everything you need to know about that particular intervention, that module. So like we said before, protein was number 1. So I purposely put constraints on myself when I designed this. If you look at engineering terms, constraints are what give you the qualities of a particular system. And in reality, it would have been much easier for me to do a 8-hour lecture about all the different aspects of dietary protein than it would be to condense it down into 1 hour. So I tried as hard as possible to condense everything down to 1 hour. And I hit that on all of them except for just the one on carbohydrates. I went a little bit over. The reason is that that's much more useful to you as you go through, right? Here's everything you need to know about protein condensed down into 1 hour. And of course, we have all the research and references and everything there for you. So the theory of each one, whether it's protein, whether it's micronutrition, fasting, you get a really nice overview within a relatively short period of time, almost like one college lecture in 1 hour, right? And so in reality, after I came up with a system, this was very hard for me to do, but I'm very happy with how it turned out. I think it's much better for you. And then to make it practical, for each intervention, we'll give you action items. So each one has 5 specific action items. So you'll know exactly what to do with each individual person, how to work with their habits and not against them. So for each individual one, you're going to have 5 action items of what to do with the client. And then, of course, within the cert, we'll tell you how do you determine which one of those 5 action items to do, which is pretty simple. But that also covers the behavior aspect of it and keeps it to a flexible design. And then we've got expert interviews. So we really get down in the weeds about different aspects, literally from the people in the lab who are creating new facts. So if you want to go and take a very deep dive into a subtopic, we'll chat with literally the people doing that. So for example, on protein, we've got a great chat with Dr. Stu Phillips from McMaster, literally one of the top protein researchers in the world. I first met Stu at ACSM in 2005, I think, actually. So a really good interview, just an awesome guy, just doing some amazing research that comes out of his facility. Also in the protein one, we've got Dr. Jose Antonio from the ISSN talking about protein overfeeding. So we get down in the weeds on what happens if you massively overfeed people on protein. We can also talk about their kidney function. And we've got all sorts of other great interviews too. We've got Dr. Eric Helms talking about flexible dieting and what he does for physique coaching. We've got Dr. Stefan Guillenet talking about the regulatory of appetite and energy expenditure a little bit at the level of the brain. We've got Dr. Dan Party talking about sleep, integration of exercise. Dr. Hunter Waldman getting a little bit more in-depth on some metabolic flexibility concepts. Dr. Mike Ornsby, Dr. Peter Fitchman, who's a natural bodybuilder, both a PhD and a coach. And I know I'm leaving out a bunch of other people you'll see show up throughout the cert also. So super honored to have all of them here helping me out. And that's the cool thing, is that I've been doing this for quite a while. So when I was able to hit them up, it was great to have them on here and to get some great information. So easy to use platform. We have this all integrated into an online learning environment. So you sign up at the Flex Diet, get on the waiting list for the next launch. And after we get your payment, get your login credentials to access the portal. This is what it looks like here. And we do have quizzes to test your knowledge on the material that you just built. Right? So there is a quiz after each one. If you're not looking to get certified and you just want the information, don't necessarily have to take the quizzes. Excuse me. But in order to get certified, you do have to pass the quizzes. And I know that it can be kind of a pain in the butt. The quizzes are not designed to be tricky. They're just designed to test your knowledge of the concepts. Because at the end, I want to make sure that everyone is at the same level. So once they are certified, everyone is at the same level. And a way to do that is to test your knowledge. All right, so a little bit on each intervention. So we talked about number one is protein. And one of the things is, why does protein enhance metabolic flexibility? And the simple answer with this is that protein is handled pretty well by most people. Meaning we can give you a very specific numbers to hit for the amount of protein. And it's pretty reliable across populations. Now that number for carbohydrates varies widely and is much harder to give an exact number for carbohydrates. We do show you in a later module how to figure that out, of course. Protein in general, the number is a little bit more fixed by age, maybe a little bit by training status. But it's relatively easy to figure out that number based on research. And we have other research showing that as you increase the amount of protein, you also enhance metabolic flexibility at the same time. So again, talking about leverage, we've got some cool leverage, right? And when you eat more protein, you increase the body's ability to have more satiety. You can read that, that's horrible. You're more full longer. And here's a little giveaway also, is that it's virtually impossible to eat too much protein and have it turn into fat. Right? So eating more protein enhances metabolic flexibility via various pathways. One of the cool research on that is from researcher Dr. Devkota, showed that as you eat more protein, people spontaneously ate less carbohydrates also. So that's interesting. So that's one of the reasons that the protein is the number one intervention. So as we said before, we're looking at coaching leverage. So we've got a great physiologic and also psychologic ability to change. Most people do better eating more protein. Yes, it is some learning of how to do that, what more protein actually looks like, a little bit on how to prepare it. But again, most people find that over time they can do that relatively easily. So that's why protein is number one. One of the other questions we talk a lot about is our branched chain amino acids. So leucine, isoleucine, and valine, those are your branched chain amino acids. And are they really needed if you're getting enough protein? Short answer is nope. However, we do go into one specific instance where the branched chain amino acids can be incredibly useful. But if you are getting enough high quality protein already, you don't really need to add more branched chain amino acids. So some people who have gone through the certification realize that they saved money on supplements and almost literally paid for the course themselves. Right, so again, we're using research to say, hey, here's what we know so far. this is useful, that's not useful. Start here and progress forward. Number 2, we talked about intervention fasting or intermittent fasting, IF. Now this brings up all sorts of different things. So when I say fasting, it's a period of time where you are not eating any food. This does not mean putting butter in your coffee or whatever else and calling it a fast. So fasting is nothing more than a period of time where you are not eating. So I know IF is kind of the latest trend, but why would we want to use it? And why did I make this the second intervention? The hint is it's related to insulin and using fat as fuel. So if we acutely lower insulin levels, then we push the body to use more fat as a fuel. Now that does not specifically mean body fat. That could mean fat coming in as you are consuming fat, something like a ketogenic type diet. But if you're fasting, you're not really consuming any other calories, right? Because we said fasting is a period of time where you're not eating. Fasting also drives insulin down, so it's primarily pushing you to use more body fat as a fuel for that. So how I got into fasting was almost like 10 years ago. I was looking for things that would enhance metabolic flexibility. I realized that insulin was a very key leverage point, which we go into a lot in the certification. And if we lower insulin, we do push the body to use fat more as a fuel. So what could I do outside of exercise, which we'll talk about coming up, to lower insulin? And it turns out fasting does a really good job of that. Now, do you have to do a specific type of fasting? No, you do not. But I found that fasting and done in a specific way was actually quite useful. And I was pretty honestly shocked at the compliance. Again, we've got a very specific protocol of how to do it, but I expected fasting in the real world to be just literally an utter debacle. And while I did screw it up myself and with several clients, I figured out a way to do it that was shockingly pretty easy. And again, much to my surprise, I found that most clients, when it was done in a particular way, they actually really liked it. And I did not expect that at all. So again, do you have to do any type of fasting? No. And there are subpopulations who should not do fasting. So for example, if your stress level is super high, you tend to skip meals all the time, you're not getting enough sleep, your lifestyle is kind of a disaster, I would not recommend any form of intermittent fasting for you. It's not going to be the greatest idea. However, for most people, I think a specific form of IF can be very useful. Again, IF has many different forms, and we'll walk you through what the research says on each one of those and what the recommendation is. But I'll give you a little key insight is it's really not doing a ton of fasting. It's not a 16-8 type approach, which can be, I think, useful for specific populations. So it's kind of more the minimal effective amount of fasting. Micronutrition number 3. The macros tend to get all the love if it fits your macros, which I'm sure you've probably heard before. Right? Maybe we can rewrite that to if it fits your micros with like a little m. So find out why these guys are super important. Right? Here's a big hint for you. A lot of your micronutrition, right? So very small amount of things, right? So macros in general are measured in grams, right? Some micronutrients such as selenium are measured in micrograms, so very, very small amounts. But these things are key for a ton of different processes in the body. One which is getting a lot of press now is for mitochondrial health. A lot of the enzymes and different processes for your body via the mitochondria to create ATP, cellular energy, need micronutrients in order to run efficiently and to run well. So if your diet is not high in micronutrition, your ability to produce ATP can be compromised, right? So therefore your ability to do work is going to be compromised, and just your general feeling of energy is going to be compromised. Also, the color of the food matters. What we learn is that different colors correspond quite well to different micronutrients or other compounds called polyphenols. Probably heard all about lycopene in tomatoes, but lycopene shows up in those red colored vegetables, right? Another one is magnesium, shows up in a lot of green colored vegetables, right? So magnesium and the chlorophyll molecule are actually very similar. So we can do things with food color to try to maximize our micronutrition. So therefore, you don't necessarily have to log everything and try to track the amount of selenium you're getting on a day-by-day basis. We can do things by looking at food color and get really close to making sure we maximize our micronutrition. So again, that's an easy way, and we talk about other ways of maximizing that. So I think micronutrition is going to be a very popular thing coming up. So NEAT. So what exactly is NEAT? So NEAT is non-exercise activity thermogenesis, which is a very fancy word. Basically just how you kind of move around and do things that are not technically exercise. So exercise is something that is planned, has a specific form of progression, and generally tracked. So NEAT would be like getting up in the morning and going to walk Fido here. So NEAT actually has a bigger role for fat loss and burning calories than exercise in the vast majority of people. Now, if you're a competitive triathlon racer, exercise probably going to be a little bit greater. If you're a highly competitive CrossFit athlete doing 3 to 4 workouts a day, yeah, exercise is going to be higher. But for most people, the amount of calories burned by NEAT is quite a bit higher than exercise. That's quite surprising to people. So we talk about some simple ways you can increase the amount of NEAT. Talk a little bit about historically what's happened to this. Here's a hint, it's dropped quite low. And the nice part about NEAT is you can put these things into your client's lifestyle, and that makes them much easier from a daily compliance. Not only does body composition improve, a lot of times performance improves also. People just report that they feel better, right? So NEAT, I think, gets kind of sometimes lost in the discussion and all the talk about the glory of exercise. And of course, exercise is still important, but you'll notice that NEAT was actually ranked higher than exercise even. But not much higher. Exercise is number 5 here. So again, this is probably redundant to a lot of people, but why is exercise important? Most people are saying, well, exercise is just because we burn calories. And it is true, you do burn calories doing exercise, but most people are pretty shocked to learn that you don't really burn that many calories doing exercise. Maybe a maximum of around 300 kilocalories. That's from a new study literally published just a couple days ago for an average lifter per session. Now that's not super high. Maybe if you're lifting a ton of volume and you're a super advanced lifter, maybe you could bump that to 400, maybe 500 on the outside, but it's not as much as what people think. Now again, that has caused some people to say, oh, well, exercise really isn't that important, which of course we all know that that is not true either. How to use the concept of TDEE. So total daily energy expenditure. And this is usually what people are talking about in regards to exercise and calories burned. Just like it says, a total daily energy expenditure. So how many calories you burn on a daily basis. And here's a hint. Your resting metabolic rate is easily over 50% of them. So just hanging out, if you were to come to the lab, we were to measure you, you hang out, you basically do nothing but breathe into this little tube, and that will give you your resting metabolic rate. And that's about easily half of the total daily energy expenditure. So exercise is important from calories burned, but not nearly as important as what we realize. It actually has a lot of other roles in maintaining resting metabolic rate. Again, we can bump that a little bit, not a ton, but we can really help to maintain it so it doesn't drop off, especially as we age. And then also, what is the difference for exercise versus recreation? And they're both super important. So I think a lot of times we get hyper-focused on exercise and forget about recreation. So again, exercise is something that's more formally tracked, recreation not so formally tracked. So as of this recording, I'm still doing exercise, do a little meditation, do a little run on the beach in the morning where I'm recording this. I go to the gym a couple times a week even here, but I'm doing a fair amount of recreation. I'm actually kiteboarding for at least a couple hours each day, hoping that the wind is up. So I'm burning probably more calories via recreation than I am exercise, right? So in people's daily life, what are things they enjoy doing? Hey, maybe you should take up a hobby. Go play golf, probably not rent a cart, go play tennis, go do other things that are fun, and those are still going to burn calories, right? So how do we put this into a system when we're talking about exercise and all the other kind of formal and informal movements of the body? Number 6, fat and ketogenics. Ketogenic diets are super popular now. And we go into great depth of what exactly is a ketogenic diet. What is the true definition of a ketogenic diet? Who should really be doing a ketogenic diet? The ketogenic diet, in my opinion, is extremely variable. Meaning there are some populations where a ketogenic diet may be extremely useful. There are other populations where I would say a ketogenic diet is not useful at all and can be detrimental. So again, who should use it? When should you use it? How should you use it? And again, this is a very polarizing topic. So this is based on what does the research say. And a key point to this is looking at ketogenics diet in terms of blood ketone levels, how they relate to carbohydrates, and an enzyme called PDH, so pyruvate dehydrogenase. And in short, there's people who do a ketogenic type diet for a period of time, and the goal is to increase the body's ability to use fat. And a ketogenic diet does a really good job of doing that. So Dr. Jeff Volek's, you can look up his FASTER study. They literally rewrote the book on how much fat a highly ketogenically adapted athlete could use during exercise. So fascinating. They literally changed the textbook on how much fat somebody can use. However, there's a downside to that. So when they tested them, they did it at a relatively high to moderate rate. And for that testing period, they did really good. But if you get closer to the speed and power end, we see that performance can drop off around 1 to 10%. So if a 1 to 10% performance drop on speed and power doesn't matter to you, then for that athlete, a ketogenic approach might be useful. So what athletes have done to try to circumvent this is they'll do a fat-adapted period of time, and then they'll go in and just load a whole bunch of carbohydrates. And then they'll do their big event. Maybe it's a race or a CrossFit event or a strongman or obstacle course race. Unfortunately, what they found was it didn't work so well. So in theory, this makes perfect sense. Increase your body's ability to use fat for a period of time, reload carbohydrates, and boom, we get to use huge amounts of carbs, huge amounts of fat, super metabolically flexible, yay, we create a bunch of freaks. Well, that didn't happen. And the reason is because of this pesky PDH enzyme. So this is like your gatekeeper to glycolysis, or your body's ability to use carbohydrates at a very fast rate for speed and power. So while if you provide enough carbohydrates after this ketogenic period, you can see muscle glycogen and liver glycogen get back to normal levels. However, you've lost some access to using those carbohydrates at the greatest level. And unfortunately, that is a downside to doing a ketogenic type approach, even if you then load carbohydrates. So there is a way to get around and do this. There is a way to dramatically increase the body's ability to use fat, to reload carbohydrates, and to not see any downturn in that PDH enzyme. So we see an increase in performance, and we don't see this loss in speed and power. And I'm kind of surprised there hasn't been more talk about that, because it's a relatively simple approach. But again, we go into that in the course on how exactly to do that and how to maximize all of those. Which of course gets into the role of carbohydrates. All right, so carbohydrates tend to get kind of sort of bastardized, right? Especially with the rise of ketogenic type diets now. The one thing I do like about ketogenic diets is if you go out to dinner with ketogenic experts, such as like Dr. Dom D'Agostino, awesome guy. I just get to eat all of his bread, which is awesome. So what is the true role of carbohydrates? Why do you need them? Now again, need here being a relative term, and it is true that there is no essential carbohydrate. I hear that. But depending on what type of athlete you are, I would argue that carbohydrates may actually be needed for a maximal amount of performance. Now again, how much and when, we go into all those kind of details. But carbohydrates still serve a very important role. And one of the ways we can look at that is there's a very rare disease called McArdle's disease. And this is a very rare genetic trait that people are missing a specific enzyme. It's called the glycophosphorylase enzyme. They miss the enzyme to take stored carbohydrates in the muscle as glycogen and break them down for fuel. This enzyme is missing. So what happens is they have high amounts of stored carbohydrates, but they can't access them. And when we have them do exercise, what we find is any exercise that has to create any higher intensity levels, their performance is dramatically reduced. And we talk a little bit about how this is related to the ability of carbs to support exercise. And it's not just extremely high levels of exercise. It's more of the high levels all the way down to maybe even moderate levels. And remember that in some people, right, depending on their degree of metabolic flexibility, they may be tuned to using more carbohydrates than another, right? So it's not as simple as, oh, just eat a bunch of carbs for the amount of exercise you do. I think that approach can work okay, but you have to realize what exercise are you doing and what is your underlying state of ability to use carbohydrates. And we'll show you kind of the magical carb equation. Now, actually, there isn't a magical carb equation, but we'll show you how do you figure out how many carbohydrates someone actually needs, right? And the answer is there's not a simple equation to do that. I wish there was. If there was, I would hopefully have figured it out by now, or at least it would be in the literature we could find, and I would be a coconut farmer on an island somewhere. But it doesn't exist, but we do show you a way of how you can figure it out. Last but not least, sleep. So why sleep is super important. We talked about why this is intervention number 8. We go through all the details of why sleep is super important. We talked about the physiology versus psychology, right? And we're trying to find the happy medium between those two for coaching clients. And that's why sleep is super important, but having discussions on sleep I find to be very difficult. Which again, that does not mean that sleep is not important. It does not mean you should never talk to your clients about it. But if your first intervention is sleep, I find that when working with actual clients outside the lab, doesn't usually tend to go well. Not everyone can just take a nap like this little monkey here in Costa Rica. And again, how much do you really need? What is the physiologic role of sleep? What does the research say? Is it really this magical kind of 8 hours a night? The answer is no, but what does the real research say? It shows probably more than that. Now again, does that mean if you have a client who's only sleeping 6 hours a night, you need to tell them, all right, those 4 hours in the evening, just give those up, go sleep for 10 hours. Probably not going to happen. Probably not going to be too happy with you. So what can we do with that client to increase their quality of sleep first? And are there some things that have overlap with some of the other interventions that we've done? So here's a big giveaway. If you get up in the morning and you do some NEAT, you go for a nice fasted walk, what you've done is at a period of time your insulin is super low, you're pushing the body to use more fat as a fuel. So you have fat as a fuel being used. It's a low intensity work, so we don't really need to fuel it with a bunch of carbohydrates. And what happens is if they do that without any sunglasses or behind windows, right? So if they go outside and they do it in the early morning, so here's our sunlight, yay! Okay, here's our stick figure going out for a walk. What we find is that, oh boy, this person's got really big eyeballs, that these bottom receptors of the eye are really key to picking up these photons of sunlight hitting it. And what that does to a certain part of the brain, especially something called SCN that regulates your circadian, your sleep rhythms, is it re-anchors them, or helps anchor them so that you're more awake during the day and more sleepy at night. So something as simple as going up for a very short walk in the morning, maybe walking the dog, taking a long walk to get your mail, whatever, can hit on multiple different interventions at once. Right? So it's not like your client has to keep doing all these interventions for each individual one. There is some overlap that is purposely built into the system so that you can understand why they're doing them. You can explain to clients why it's important. And for the action item that the client is doing, we're trying to get the maximal amount of effect. So thank you very much for your time. I greatly appreciate it. To get all the information and details, go to www.flexdiet.com today to register for the next class or to get on the wait list if it's in between the scheduled releases. This is Dr. Mike T. Nelson. Thank you very much. Greatly appreciate it. I look forward to seeing you in the class.